Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Linda Osesso, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Women in Global Health Seattle team. Thank you for joining us today for the Global Health Pathways Navigating Careers and Opportunities workshop, hosted by the Women in Global Health Seattle chapter and sponsored by the University of Washington Department of Global Health. If you'd like to, please share your name, your location, and your organization, if applicable, in the chat so that we can know who's present with us here today. Also, please note that this meeting is being recorded. So this is our agenda for today's session, just so you can see what's coming ahead. But before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge the land we occupy today. For those in the Seattle area, we acknowledge that we are on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, past and present, including the Duwamish. If you are joining us from elsewhere in the US, we invite you to learn more about the tribal land you occupy by visiting the link shared in the chat and to commit through words and action to respect and support Native peoples as true owners of these lands. I would now like to introduce my fellow WGH Seattle co-chair, Pallavi Deb, to kick off our session today.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, everyone. My name is Pallavi, and as Linda mentioned, I am one of the co-chairs of Women in Global Health Seattle chapter. This session is the first part of our three-part workshop series, and I welcome you all. For those joining us for the first time, our mission as a chapter is to work on this movement of professional women and their allies working in global health in Pacific Northwest to build professional and personal networks, accelerate career advancement, and champion inclusive leadership in global health, with the vision to have a world where global health leadership is truly equitable and powered by diverse voices, shaping decisions and driving better health outcomes for everyone. So with that, I'd like to quickly reflect on why we planned this workshop and why now and for whom we have designed this workshop series. Next slide, please. As we all know, the global health sector is experiencing a profound transformation right now. We are witnessing fundamental shifts in funding models, evolving development sector priorities, widespread job uncertainties, and significant workforce reductions, which have created a new landscape for professionals to navigate and have created an opportunity to view systems through a very different lens. This workshop series is intentionally designed for mid-career professionals to support them with practical guidance, skills, and real market intelligence that they can apply and practice. Next slide, please. Now, with that, I would like to kick off today's panel session, Preparing to Navigate a Reshaped Global Health Industry, by welcoming Annette Guy, who will be moderating this session. Annette is a consulting evaluator and a socio-behavioral epidemiologist. She has a wide range of experience working with applied research teams with the WHO and more recently in the implementation sphere as a global health leader for monitoring and evaluation at World Vision International. She also teaches and mentors master's and doctoral students at the Department of Global Health at the University of Washington. Thank you, Annette, for moderating this important panel discussion. This session will help us to set a realistic picture of the current and probable future state of global health industry, discovering new possibilities beyond traditional roles, and then envisioning alternative futures. Also, I quickly want to make a note that questions posed during both of our sessions today will be consolidated and shared with our panelists and speakers afterwards. So please feel free to put your questions or comments in the chat function. Any comments in response will be shared back with all our attendees. With that, I would like to welcome Annette. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Pallavi, and welcome everyone onto this webinar. I'm excited to see we currently are showing 61 participants. That's fantastic. I'd like to first introduce Heidi Van Rooyen, who is the new chair of the Department of Global Health at the University of Washington. She has about a year under her belt at this point. She is also the first chair to be from the Global South in this role. With over 30 years of experience across government, academia, and science councils, she's a seasoned leader, social scientist, and clinical psychologist. Her interdisciplinary research addresses health inequities related to gender, race, sexual orientation, and geography, using innovative methods like poetic inquiry and storytelling to drive impactful community-based solutions in HIV, COVID, and reproductive health. She is deeply committed to fostering equitable global partnerships and advancing inclusive public health scholarship. Her appointment as chair marks a significant step towards decolonizing global health leadership. Heidi is also a sponsor of this Global Health Pathways event, and it's in this capacity that I invite her to welcome you all before we start the panel discussion. Heidi, over to you. You're muted. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'm unmuted now. Thank you very much, Annette, for the warm welcome. I'll just say a few words to everyone. It's really wonderful to be with you, to be in a group of women, all at different stages of our careers, but all gathered to think together about how to navigate this moment of uncertainty and possibility. I think it's fair to say we all have been living this reality of the last year. The global health landscape is fundamentally changing, as you've just heard. And I think many things are being questioned. Traditional structures that have shaped global health, often designed through northern institutions and frameworks, these are all being upended and questioned. And for many of us, this has created, understandably, a lot of anxiety about what comes next, created uncertainty about what our careers are and could be given the shift. And I think this panel is very timely given all of that. I think you're going to hear today, reinforced by many on the panel, that was the following point, and that is, while this moment is uncomfortable, challenging, awful, violent, choose your adjective, while it feels like this moment is not entirely in our hands, certainly not with our sense of timing or pace, I do think on the other side of all of those things, that this is a moment for us to reflect, to reimagine, to kind of also consider what might be the opportunities to come to this really difficult moment, perhaps with a sense of creativity and imagination. And so I'm really looking forward to this unfolding conversation today. I'm really looking forward to engaging with the other panelists as we respond to some of the questions before us. And I want to just say that as women gathered in this room, I think now, and as in all other big moments in our lives around the world, women are called to lead, to question, to mentor, to build different pathways, different ways of thinking about issues. And I think we've done this before. We've been asked to do it again now, and I look forward to our conversation and how we navigate that. Thank you, everyone, and yeah, over to you again, Annette.
Thank you very much, Heidi. I'd like to go on to introduce the three other panelists we have joining us today, all representing different perspectives to contribute to this robust discussion. I'll start with Jen Driscoll. Jen leads the strategy for maternal, newborn, and child nutrition and the health team at Gates Foundation, which she joined in 2013. Her previous experience includes serving as finance director for the education division at the American Institutes for Research. She holds a degree in economics and a postgraduate diploma in strategy and innovation from the University of Oxford. Julia Roper is a director and global health lead at Panorama Strategy, which is a consulting firm that partners with organizations to turn their visions for social impact into a reality. She advises foundations, NGOs, industry leaders, and others on designing and executing strategies to expand programs, build meaningful collaborations, shape policy, and drive long-lasting impact. Julia's background includes supporting national immunization programs across Africa and Asia, collaboration on global policy initiatives with Gavi, WHO, and other partners, and facilitating a multi-stakeholder coalition and workshops to advance collective thinking and action. Born and raised in Washington, Julia worked abroad for several years before returning to Seattle in 2020. And finally, we have joining us Mariam Zamir as the Director for Immunization at Village Reach. Mariam brings over 15 years of experience in improving equitable access to healthcare across Africa and South Asia. A seasoned expert in immunization and primary healthcare, she has previously worked at the Gates Foundation and at PATH. Her work focuses on translating evidence into actionable strategies that improve access, equity, and accountability, particularly in partnership with bilateral and multilateral agencies, including Gavi. Mariam holds degrees in economics and public policy and is a Doctor of Public Health candidate at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, as well as a Women Lift Fellow. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to this panel discussion. Next slide, please. To introduce our discussion today, I'd like to share with you these figures from a recent publication released by the IHME. If you're interested in accessing the full publication, the link is in the chat. The first graph here takes a longer view between 1990 and 2025, which is the last year of which is estimated values. And what this starts to show clearly is that starting in 2022, actually, there was a shrinking in the global investment portfolio. Looking more recently at trends for 2024 to 2025, we see the enormous changes in the US investment specifically in foreign development for health. On the left-hand side is the absolute amount for the US. It's over $8 billion. And on the right-hand side it's expressed as a percentage, a decrease of well over 60% in the US case, but decreases in other countries as well, and minimal increases in other governments. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask our panelists, starting with Heidi, please. And the question is, how do you see the prevailing funding models in global health shifting in response to recent events? How do you think that should affect our thinking about potential career paths?
Yeah, thanks very much. And it was kind of really nice to see the data. It gives it to us in a really visual and stark form. I want to make 2 points in response to the question. The first is, you can see global health financing shifting. The shift is, for the most part, global health was dominated by the global health funding was dominated by the global north, through bilateral donors like USAID, PEPFAR, and the National Institutes of Health. And you can see, as you've shown in these graphs, that architecture is shifting. So the financing is shifting, but I think what is also shifting is the ways in which we have typically done global health, and I'll say a bit more about that. But what you're starting to see already in this last year is that across Africa and other regions, we've seen regional and national leadership taking much more of a lead in global health. Ministries of Health, Africa CDC, and other regional bodies are starting to kind of band together and to set priorities, shaping partnerships and building systems that reflect their own context and ambition. So the shift in the architecture, the shift in the funding also shifts agenda setting, also shifts what are priorities for global health, also shifts the ways in which countries are starting to look at and address global health. There have been a couple of really important initiatives in the Global South, which I think are important. The EU-AU Health Partnership, Africa CDC, WHO, Africa groups have kind of re-energized their partnership. All of these things are starting to kind of reimagine a bit of the global order. And I think the thing that's really, really important is for the longest time, there's been a real sense of dependency from the global south on the global north. This shift in architecture, in some ways for me comes with a bit of a positive, with Africa and the region, the global south, taking much more ownership, taking much more leadership, hopefully being better at shared accountability, inclusion, and hopefully are starting to see a much more diversified, sustainable financing model that is not always 100% or to such a large extent dependent on the global north. So the important things shift, I think, in these funding flows, but I think also shift in power, in voice, and in ownership in global health. And I think those are fundamentally good things. And even though this rupture in global health has felt so violent at times this year, what it might be getting us to, I think, are really good things. And this brings me to my second point. I think what it brings us to is a different way of navigating the ways in which we have done partnerships in global health, from maybe much more transactional partnerships to real co-ownership. The old model, often the global north designed, the global south implemented in those very crude terms. I think that old model is no longer acceptable, and that we have a real opportunity to reframe how we think about equity, not just how we think about it, but how we do equity, how we do reciprocity, how we do genuine partnership between the global north and south, that kind of sees both parts of this equation as much, much more fundamentally equal than we've been up until this point.
Thank you so much. Wonderful comments. Jen, I'd like to turn over to you to add to that.
Happy to. First off, I'd love to say I'm delighted to be on this panel, even though it's a very dreary day in Seattle. This is a great way to network and meet many of you that, looking through the list, I don't know. So I am happy to get to know many of you. Completely agree, Haiti. We are seeing a massive rebalancing from these global donor-designed initiatives to more country-led priorities. And that, in some ways, in many ways, is a really healthy shift. I can speak from my lens, which is coming from philanthropy, and we've also grappled with many of the things that you talked about, which is the how we do philanthropy. Not that the funding in philanthropy will ever fill the gap that you showed in that previous chart. It's quite massive, but there is money flowing into the system. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of those big announcements that were made in the past 6 months or a year. The Gates Foundation recently announced $2.5 billion on women's health R&D from now to 2030, which is a big chunk of funding. We also announced the Beginnings Fund this year, and that's a $600 million collaborative with SIF and ELMA and other partners, also focused on maternal health. There's things like the UNICEF Child Nutrition Fund. And I say all of that because I think we do need to look at where the funding flow is. If you are looking, to change your career or exploring a career move, who is getting funded? What work are they doing? What skills are in demand? Map out what is possible and how you can contribute to that, because I think there's still so much work to be done. The other point I wanted to make was going from maybe macro down to micro is that the global health space has traditionally been so very siloed. People, do their bench research or their product R&D, or they focus on their one specific disease. And I think there's multiple ways to look at that. We can do a lot more integration, but also if you were someone that was traditionally working in the delivery space, how are your skills transferable to the R&D space? And I only say that because from my lens at the foundation, I happen to work on this team, the Maternal Newborn Child Nutrition and Health team. It is an end-to-end team. So my team has bench research scientists, it has OBGYNs, it has midwives, it has clinicians, it has product developers, it has delivery experts. So there is a real depth and breadth of skills across the team. For me personally, 5 years ago, I was mostly focused on country work, and now I've learned a lot about product development, more than I ever thought I would ever know. And so there are skills that you have that you may not realize that you have that are completely transferable to other places and other areas. I think that's what I had to say on that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jen. I'd like to just give Miriam an opportunity if she has anything to add to this topic.
Yeah, thanks for having me on this panel as well. And I just completely agree with Heidi and Jen. I think the only thing I wanted to mention is that I think in the previous model that we had, similar to what Heidi and Jen were saying, it was very top-down focused and driven by a lot of people that are based in, the global north, US, Europe, etc., who may never have lived in a lot of the low-income countries or low-middle-income countries that we work in. And I think in terms of the shift that we're seeing, I think that is definitely going to go away, and having not just the work experience, but the lived experience from there and working over there and being based over there is going to be important and critical.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'd like to move on to our next question, which in many ways is related to the first one. How are programmatic foci, or some people might call it sectors, how are they shifting alongside these economic changes affecting the global health industry? What of foci or sectors are stable and growing versus shrinking? And are there any emerging areas that we should all be aware of as potential opportunities? I'd like to go to Julia with this question first.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. So as Annette mentioned, in my work kind of leading our global health portfolio at a consulting firm, really had the opportunity to be in it with our clients from foundations, NGOs, pharmaceutical companies, and kind of help people as they think about how to navigate all the disruption from this year. And I'd say one thing I'm excited about is really just within the past 2 to 3 months, I've seen a big shift of people and organizations moving from being very reactive to all of the changes to becoming more proactive. So we're seeing a lot of organizations really redefine their priorities, set their strategies for the years ahead, and rethink business models. And a lot of what I'm seeing in terms of where people are headed, what they're focused on, it's not so much brand new ideas, but I'd say more so an acceleration of a lot of trends that we've been discussing and that have been ongoing for years. So I want to highlight 2 of those trends. One is kind of moving from siloed vertical programs like HIV, malaria, et cetera, which are still very important, but looking for more opportunities for investment in more foundational and holistic priorities and issues like primary health care, like universal health coverage, et cetera. And the idea being that investing in these systems in these areas will hopefully lead to greater sustainability of health systems in the future, but it's also a way I see people are taking to meet the moment and try to do more with less. And I think this creates opportunities for professionals who can demonstrate that they can work across sectors and that they can apply cross-cutting skills to different situations. And then the second theme I wanted to highlight, which my co-panelists have already brought up, but just this movement from moving power and money to more local levels. And I think this is such an important and positive change for the field. Though knowing, in thinking about this group and a lot of people from Seattle, I know that brings uncertainty. But I'd encourage us to really think about it as this is an invitation to think differently about our roles, what our roles could look like as connectors, as collaborators, and as amplifiers. And I think there's still a need for people who can bridge those global and local perspectives, for people who are ready to help navigate complex partnerships, be adaptable and innovative. But I do think within the US, we really do need to interrogate what roles are appropriate additive. And then just to highlight a few topics that I'm excited about, that I'm seeing a lot of momentum in, would be, one is climate and health. I think very fast growing field. I think digital and data ecosystems, moving beyond a one-off app or an intervention, but looking more at the infrastructure around data. I think health workforce development, especially at community and primary care levels. And then also private sector engagement and talking about money and where are there avenues to bring in new forms of financing or better engage the private sector for more sustainable programs. So those are some areas that I see a lot of activity around and I'm excited about.
Fantastic, Julia. Jen, over to you to add on to those ideas.
Love it. This is great. Completely agree that this next phase is not about these single diseases. It is about this integrated care model. I think I'll add on to what you said, of course, climate and health, of course, some of these other things. AI, for sure. I mean, we are rapidly expanding our work in this area, and it is exciting. I think it is something that really could accelerate transformation. It has the opportunity to leapfrog some of the ways that with the space has operated. There's everything from patient-led care to what can you do if you have a device in your hand to clinical decision support for midwives and frontline workers. So we're working on some really interesting things, and I find that really fascinating. I think beyond that, like the adjacencies, Julia mentioned this, you know, the infrastructure, energy, digital connectivity, telecommunications, these are all going to be growing fields for sure. So that's something to focus on. And it's maybe not something you would traditionally call quote unquote global health, but that is contributing to economic development and growth for sure. The other thing I would say too, and this was touched on as well, is there's also a lot going on in process innovation. So getting the cost of things down is going to be absolutely critical. Doing more with less, making things more efficient, working through maybe market models, social enterprises, things that maybe did not work in the past or weren't really tried. I think those are really new, and that'll go off. And then the last thing I would say is partnerships. That is something, I mean, we've always spent a lot of time at the foundation working on partnerships and co-funding projects, but it has really ramped up to the next level in the past year, 2 years, and that for sure, as we all look for new sources of money, new funders, new everything, those new collaborations are going to be super important. So, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I'd like to give Miriam a chance to close out this discussion point.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. Agree with everything that Julia and Jen mentioned. So I'm not going to repeat that. I think in terms of focusing on integration and preventative healthcare and such. I think from my perspective, all of this really comes down to efficiency and effectiveness. And that's one of the things why we're focusing around integration and breaking around silos and such. So I'll take it from the perspective of programs were effective and there was a lot of information and data around it, but not enough around the cost effectiveness of it and the efficiencies and where efficiencies can be realized. And because of the crunch in funding, I would say there is more of an important need to try and see what are those efficiencies, how do you prioritize, and one of the prioritization criteria is related to financing and health financing and the cost effectiveness of this, which can then enable either budgeting in government budgets or sharing with donors to figure out what that prioritization looks like. I think the second area that I want to mention is that even before what happened this year in terms of global health, one of the things we were realizing was that a lot of the interventions and coverage and outcome metrics were stagnating to some extent. And I'll talk about immunization since that's what we work in. And there was definitely a shift in mindset that needed to happen in terms of how do we really find out what the problems and challenges are from the communities themselves directly? So how are you thinking about and incorporating community voices in a routine manner instead of having like top-down interventions that are coming or only based on like academic research, but really asking people who live and breathe and work through these challenges in terms of what's working, what's not working, and design things based on that feedback.
Fantastic. all very much in line with my profession, monitoring and evaluation. Yeah. Yay. So now I'd like to shift gears and ask a bit more about the the kinds of career pathways that you might explore. If you were one of the people in the audience here, a mid-career professional facing this pervasive uncertainty, we need to acknowledge that we are a mission-driven clan of folks. We are highly motivated by the ultimate outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and we're all on that same team. So how can this next generation of potentially global health professionals and leaders be more impactful and adaptable, and perhaps consider unconventional paths? I'd like to start with Miriam again with this question.
Yeah, thanks, Annette. I think I'll start with saying that just even the term global health comes from the perspective of the global north. In the countries that we work in, this is just health. This is public health. This is the regular day-to-day. So there is a lot of work that happens in the countries that is not often funded by international donors and work that is being done in INGOs. Now, this might not work for a lot of people who are living and based in the US, but I want to sort of propose this idea of there's a lot of work that happens. And I think a lot of the smaller organizations that are working domestically, or local organizations, local CSOs and such, don't always have the capacity and some of the skills to be able to either write big donor-funded projects or present their numbers in a really nice, clean way, which is attractive to people. And using your skills to work with them and upskill them and build that capacity can be an area that I want to propose. I recognize this may not work for a lot of people that are based in the US, but that is really where some of the change is going to happen, especially with some of the discussions that we were having previously. I think the other thing which is really popular and a lot of people are thinking about is, of course, in terms of changing industries and thinking about how do we work with, how do we take the skills that we have, but go to the nexus of global health, and whether it's around venture philanthropy or philanthropy strategy or private sector, or thinking about innovation health labs. So not necessarily related to direct implementation, but a little bit more around strategy and such. And maybe the last thing I'll mention in this is thinking about social entrepreneurship. There's some areas in health and financing that have done a lot more in social entrepreneurship, which creates a little bit of a more sustainable model and not dependent on external donor funding. Are interesting things to explore and think about, where you can take some of the skills that you have in health and in business and partner with some kind of cross-functional teams to be able to still continue to work in this area in a slightly different way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Miriam. I want to turn to Julia to augment this same idea.
Yeah, to add what Miriam said, I do think now is a good time for people to build and showcase those cross-cutting skills, things like strategy development, partnerships, communications, impact measurement, skills where you can apply to a number of different topics or situations. I think this moment calls on us to be adaptable. And I also want to acknowledge for a lot of people who are currently out of work or in a tough, job situation now and looking to change. I know it's a hard job market and I know it's discouraging. I think it's difficult to know what to say, but what I kept coming back to as well, and one thing I've gotten to see in my work, is social impact and supporting health and well-being is happening all around us. So I think I'd encourage people to, specifically if you're looking for that next role, really think expansively. I've seen a lot of how broad the opportunities are out there in this space if you look beyond the familiar organizations or familiar job titles. Some examples I wanted to call out is recently I did a project with the resident services team of a big affordable housing community, and they worked on how can they bring health services to their 20,000 residents. We also have worked with a startup that is very tech focused, but has a use case to support maternal health around the world. And they have a partnerships team that's not tech people, but people who are looking to understand and navigate partnerships in the space. Likewise, I've worked with policy folks and partnerships folks at pharmaceutical companies. I even had a colleague who did a project with Land O'Lakes, which is the butter company. So when I have looked for global health jobs, I've not gone to butter companies to look at their roles. But in this case, they have a philanthropy arm and we're working on food security and nutrition projects. So I think really kind of taking that broad look, I think also giving yourself permission and kind of alleviating the pressure that the next role does not have to be the perfect one. I think especially now in the job market, in this day and age, the average tenure for someone at their job in the US is less than 4 years. And if you're under 35, it's less than 3 years. So I think instead of looking for something that is perfect or everything you want, really thinking about priorities. I know I like to be working with good people and be learning new things. And that's what I prioritize. And just thinking that kind of any opportunity is not the end all be all, but it's a chance to learn new skills to bring you forward. I like to tell people to think about it as a series of strategic experiments in your career versus this linear journey. So that's my suggestion, is to think really expansively.
I like that, a series of experiments. Wonderful. I'd like to circle back to you, Heidi, on this one and close out the thoughts on this idea.
Yeah, sure. I thought those were all really good points. I was frantically taking notes. Not that I'm under 35 or under 40, but we're all in the market. But I think one of the things that I really wanted to say was, and I think you mentioned this, Julie, in your comments about noticing just a shift in the change of the temperature. I think what shifted is that we are out of the crisis mode. We are out of that. I mean, I think those first few months, it felt like we couldn't even breathe. We couldn't even think. We didn't have the mental or emotional capacity to imagine. So the thing I really want to say is just don't panic. Don't panic. Just stand still. Stand still in your capacities, your strengths. And from that place, you can do some of this much more creative imagining of where and what and how you could take your skills, capacities, your values, your mindset, and apply it in these different kinds of ways. I think we are in the space to be doing exactly this, thinking a bit more creatively. One of the things I wanted to add to the conversation is, and I think I can't remember who it was, but made this point about, I think we have to be thinking about global health in different ways. We've had this artificial boundary between kind of local public health and global health. And I think for many ways, when we've thought about global health, we thought about it as something that happened somewhere else. And mostly this happened in low middle income countries, often framed through a very northern lens. But I think if anything, our experience over the last few years, COVID and beyond, pandemics, climate change, migration, widening inequalities around the world, have made it really, really clear that health challenges are deeply interconnected, that boundaries are actually fairly invisible things. They no longer exist, even though there are big attempts to try and reimpose them at the moment. They don't really exist, particularly from a kind of health point of view. And so I think it means the skills, insights, partnerships, the knowledge, the values that frame that work, whether it's here or there, can be applied in both contexts. So we have to lose or soften this idea of global health as something that happens out there. In fact, global is local and the local is global. So maybe it's not so much thinking about where in the world should I work, but rather asking yourself is how can I work globally, the skills, capacities, values, mindsets that I have, wherever I am. How can I work globally wherever I am? And that there's real value in us being able to think about what are these global issues? What are these inequities? What are these health issues that are showing up locally right here that I could apply my skills to? What lessons from global practices, processes that you might have applied in other contexts could be brought to this context in the US? And how can you position yourself as a bridge? I think somebody else made this point, a bridge connecting local innovation to much more global context and policy. So I think there are a range of possibilities and options available to us, but it's going to require a different kind of thinking. I think this we've talked about in the conversations today, I've been reminded about how many times we've used a whole lot of words like genuine partnership, for example. And this other word we've used a lot is interdisciplinary. And I think what the moment allows us to do is to really start to live those words now, to really work in much more interdisciplinary ways with each other, to be much more formed and shaped by our values, to think about these broader systems, to think about both local realities and global systems, and to kind of figure out what is our place and what can we bring to all of them.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heidi. That's inspirational and really does sort of transition us nicely to our final question, which is much more on sort of the personal level. If you're navigating a career transition in this difficult moment, it can be really tough on the ego. And as you mentioned, Heidi, it's necessary for us to come out of panic mode and be still and think intentionally and strategically about our futures. So if you were in the shoes of the people in this webinar and who will be coming to our face-to-face events that follow, what approaches would you use to stay motivated, to stay on track, to be resilient when you invariably encounter setbacks, and what have been some of the sources for encouragement that you've had over the years? I'd like to start with you, Heidi.
Yeah, sure. And maybe ego and the word humility kind of feels like they come up together. One of the big thing for me, and a lot of the things I want to say here is really just reflecting on my own last year, and maybe to talk about 4 quick things that I think that have helped me and it might help you. The first thing is I think that this moment has been quite humbling for global health. It's been quite humbling for those of us who've been working in global health from the global north. And the humility has come from, we've got a real sense of ourselves and our identity and our careers from the ways in which this architecture was fashioned, the ways in which we are positioned as those with the resources, the power, the agenda, the knowledge, the know-how. What this moment has done is kind of quite, I've used the word violently a lot because it's felt like that, quite violently kind of upended that whole thing on which our careers and our identities and ourselves have rested. And what it's forcing is, I think, a much more human reckoning, a much more moment of humility, of recognizing that us in the global north come with a set of skills, resources, capacities that are equal to what the global south brings to this engagement. Often I think we've approached it as what we bring is better. And what we do is we take our better money, our better resources, better ideas, and we kind of do something with them in the south. The humility is kind of a leveling of that. And I think in a recognition, firstly, of you go in as equal partners to these exchanges. And I think that's a good thing. The thing that I've really rested on a lot in this last year has been around self-compassion. Again, a word that I think we overuse, but I've really tasted it in my mouth 1,000 times this last year. It's really just acknowledging, holding yourself with kindness as you try and navigate these next steps and try and figure out what might be, if you've lost a job and have to kind of move to another one or find another one, to just hold yourself with a self-compassion, and to also just release the idea of yourself and your career that you may have held onto in a very particular way. And I think a couple of people have talked about that, to release it and to hold that and to hold yourself with some degree of lightness as you kind of figure out what these next steps might be. For me, the thing that's really, really helped me most, I think, has been, in all the uncertainty and all the chaos, has been reminding myself of my purpose. So staying anchored in your purpose, this deeper why that brings us all to global health. For me, it's hands that I think try and make a difference in the world, advancing justice, improving lives, building equity, might be similar for you. But when the world around us is crumbling and structures are changing and things are changing and there's so much uncertainty, that's the only thing you have, that deeper why, that keeps you then grounded and keeps you grounded. And from that place, you can begin to kind of think about what next and where and how. Where are other places I could take those same values and give them life and give them expression? People have talked a lot about flexibility and adaptability in their various examples. So I won't say much about that. And I think the last thing that's really, really helped me, I have a coach who said to me, how are you going to survive this? I just moved to South Africa, from South Africa to Seattle. I've been here in a year, and the whole global health field exploded. How are you going to survive? And she made me make a list of community. Who are you going to call when it gets really enough? Not in South Africa. Who's your community in Seattle? And that's been a third and important thing, is you're not alone in this. We all are grappling. We all are navigating. We all are trying to figure this out. So find a community, find people that can hold you and help you as you kind of navigate some of the next steps.
Fantastic. That's so important, absolutely critical. Miriam, I'd like to give you an opportunity to add your thoughts here.
Yeah, thanks. I think everything Haiti said resonates so much. And first, I want to acknowledge again how distressing this is in terms of, job loss, but also what it means for people personally, right? You're applying for a job or you're reaching out to people and people aren't responding or you get rejections. I think it's easy to say don't take it personally, but of course it always feels personal as well. And as an overthinker, I definitely empathize with that because I tend to overthink on some of these aspects as well. I think I wanted to start with also saying that, as somebody who experienced job loss myself at some point in time, and when I initially moved to the US, I did not move with a job. I immigrated, but I didn't have a job in hand, and trying to build a network from scratch where you didn't know anybody, where if you reached out to people, you wouldn't get a response necessarily because they knew you. It is a very difficult time. So I think I was reflecting in this question in terms of what did I do and what worked for me. And one of the first things I want to say is having some sort of a schedule was just practically very important, because it's easy to go down this route of like not having a schedule. And how do you create that self-discipline in terms of saying, I need to talk to X number of people every day or X number of jobs, or what do I need to do, and set some like daily targets for yourself, because that not having that schedule can really hurt you in a personal manner. And there's a dark path that you can go down on, and hopefully not a lot of people are going down that path. I think what really helped me when I reflect on it was doing a lot of informational interviews and trying to talk to people. And this is a tough time. I recognize that because everyone is reaching out to everybody for conversations, but trying to also reach out to people. You might reach out to 100 people and get responses from 10. And I can go back to the tracking sheet I had from that point in time where it was, people were not always responsive from a different perspective, but it is helpful to do that and think through that. And I think there's a personal decision that people have to make at some point in time and this is really a personal decision, personal financial decision, personal risk-taking decision based on your own circumstances in terms of where are you and how much leeway do you have to stick to that industry and continue pursuing that industry, whether it's global health or whether it's global development more broadly and you can expand in other global arenas, or you need to do a completely different shift and take whatever job you get because you need to keep your lights on and you may need to make your day-to-day payments and bill payments. And that is an assessment I think only somebody on their personal level can actually make. But thinking through what those daily steps can be for yourself, like how many informational interviews do I need to do? How many people did I reach out to on LinkedIn? How do I update my CV? How do I create different versions of my CV? I think can be really helpful. And maybe the last point to mention is, thinking about how do you differentiate yourself from everybody else and finding opportunities where there may not be. So taking up a project or, pursuing something that you're personally interested in. I think Julia was giving the example as well earlier around this, and using that to showcase and differentiate yourself, which can be interesting. It can be anything from I'm using, for example, my Women Lift Health project around nursing moms and the challenges they face to see what I can do, something aside from my work. And, thinking about what is interesting and personal for you and using that as a differentiator can be something to stand out from everybody else.
Thank you very much. We are running short on time, but I did want to give just a minute or so to see whether Jen or Julia have anything to add.
Yeah, happy to jump in. I also wanted to acknowledge, I'm reading the chat, I see these comments, I understand this is really scary. And I do come from a position of privilege right now, having a job, which ultimately could go away tomorrow. We never know anymore, and the world is changing so fast. I really love these points about networking. I think you all are doing the right things, being on this call, being part of this workshop, looking at your own skills and capabilities. And I do think it is important to do those things that fill your tank. I mean, it's very depleting to have unresponses, no's, and when you look at someone, you only ever see the yeses. You don't see how many no's they received in their life. You only see on LinkedIn all of the credentials. You don't see all the things. I've had many no's in my own career, and I'm sure everyone on this call has as well. So I guess the advice is just suit up and show up and do the next right thing and set those goals for yourself and make finding a job your job, you know, and I'll turn it over to Julia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
No, I know we're at time, and I think Jen summed it up perfectly. So just a lot of, yeah, acknowledgement of how difficult this is on so many people. And I know that none of the like advice or ideas we can give here really, like, there's no perfect answer, no perfect next step. So I think just continuing to lean in on community is kind of how I cope when I'm in those tough situations. But love to end on the words that Jen said.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. This has been a wonderful discussion, I think, filled with strategic optimism. Reality check, yes, but strategic optimism, some interesting and eye-opening insights for people to take away. And I think empathy for the folks who are on this call and hopefully will be attending our workshops. They're in such a difficult situation, but there are some encouraging things that we can do, including things we can do ourselves to help ourselves weather this storm. So I want to thank everybody again for being a part of this panel discussion as the opening of our Global Health Pathways event. And now I'd like to transition to our next session. Before we close out the webinar, I'd like to introduce Anna Volbrecht. She is the communications lead for the 737 program at Boeing. From 9 to 5, Anna does her best impression of a communications professional, applying her near fluent grasp of the English language to tell stories and strengthen the culture of Boeing's 737 program. She has also managed teams of communications and advocacy professionals around the world. Originally from Washington, D.C., Anna served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Botswana, went to college in the UK, and now lives with her husband and 2 cats in Seattle. She will present the topic Decoding Job Taxonomies Across Sectors, and will share her lived experience with us. Thank you, Anna. Over to you.
All righty, so let me go ahead and pop my screen up. Let's see. So now you're in for something, as I like to say, completely different. So I was asked to come and talk a little bit about decoding job taxonomies. And for those of you who on the call already know who I am, I handle things slightly differently, as you can probably tell by the mushroom on this slide. This is something that I am particularly passionate about, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to come and speak with you all today, just because I have been through a career transition. I went from working in global health to now working in aerospace. And if you hear any loud banging in the background, that's because I am sitting in an airplane factory today, which is still wild to me, but wanted to just share my experience and perhaps provide a little bit of insight and suggestion for those of you who are also in this point of career transition. as I was listening to that panel, which was fabulous, took some notes, and I wrote down, make a joke about trying to tempt people away from the world of global health into the private sector, but just really acknowledging that there is a world beyond global health. And if you're in the position that was just being discussed of needing to have other options, there is a world here, and you do have transferable skills, and there are ways to make those transferable skills really well seen by hiring managers and organizations. And so that's what we'll talk about a little bit today. I did want to recognize that we are in a really heartbreaking place for global health. As someone who has been outside of the global health sphere for a few years now, watching what has been happening with USAID and other large funders has been incredibly gut-wrenching. And so I am just really grateful to have the opportunity to come and talk to you and give something back to a community that has given me a lot over the course of the years. And regardless of why you are looking for a new career, whether it's in global health or out of global health, there's no shame in it. It's something I think we sort of dance around, is this idea that we should be worried and concerned about looking for something outside of a sector that we have called home for many, many years. So whether it's for your own personal reasons and you're feeling burnt out and you need something new, or if you have been laid off, there are ways to ensure that the career that you've built in global health works in other sectors. I'm going to talk a little bit about theory up front, and then we will talk about my personal experience, but a lot of what we're talking about here is going to be covered as well in day 2 of the workshop, where we'll have a little bit more practical hands-on skills. So don't worry, that is coming, but I wanted to basically give you all a bunch of homework and things to think about over the next week, so that you come really ready to engage next week when we do more of those practical exercises. So I'm a communications person. We'll start with words. When we're thinking about taxonomies, we're thinking about how we organize things, how we group things, how we talk about things, but wanted to return to basics of the English language and give you a little bit of a high school English pop quiz. So there's 2 things to think about when we're talking about how you relate transferable skills from global health to other organizations. And that's the difference between denotation and connotation. So denotation is the literal definition of the word that you're using. So project coordinator means something if you look it up in the dictionary. But what's more important is the connotation of the words that you're using and making sure that the context makes sense and you're actually saying what you're trying to say. There is 500 different ways that organizations define project coordinator. And so understanding how they're using that word and the types of skills that they're associating with that is really important to make sure that you are talking about the same things that the organization that you're applying to is also talking about. Perfect, I covered all the things on that slide. All right. We also need to look at it in bigger picture. So it's not just taking a search and replace function or an AI tool to replace your job title with a job title that is more aligned with what you're expecting to see, but also looking at how you're talking about it and the context in which you are. I always come back to this idea that poetry is what gets lost in translation. So if you're translating a poem from one language to another language, you're often going to miss things if you're doing a word-for-word translation. Instead, you're trying to capture the essence of what the poem says. You're trying to capture that emotion, you're trying to capture that rhythm, and there's something in it that isn't just that word-for-word translation. That's also true of your professional experience. When you're taking your CV and you're looking to apply it to an organization or a company that has absolutely nothing to do with global health, it is really, really critical to make sure that you are using the language and the feeling and the emotion that that organization is looking for, so that it is not just getting past the AI screen, but actually demonstrating the value that you can potentially add to this company. Part of the trick of there is becoming fluent in the language of another company, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that's the big theory piece up front. And now I'm going to dive into, as I've said before, which I love, my series of strategic experiments that I've gone through over the course of my career. So I started out as a student of peace and conflict studies. I could tell you all about different theories of war, greed and grievance, all of that kind of stuff. It has very little to do with the work that I'm doing every day now. I also was a proposal writer and then went and worked in retail. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And then I really found my home in global health. So I worked at Village Reach, I worked at PATH. I've worked at a few other organizations as a consultant, which I'll talk about in a second. But that was really where I grew up as a professional. It's where I learned how to be a professional and how to do the things that I still do every day in my job. I absolutely loved it, but as you can see, my career path has been in no way linear. And if you have a linear career path, like, more power to you. I absolutely love that, but it's also totally fine to feel like you need to bounce around in order to find your professional home. And that is very much what I have done over the last several years. So we're really going to start talking about when I left PATH and started working at Wizards of the Coast, because that is really where my career transition began. So Wizards of the Coast, for those of you who don't know, is a board game company. They make Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. So if you put yourself back in early 2021, that's when all of this started, I was feeling pretty burnt out, if I'm fully honest. I already had a pretty large workload and I was working a lot of hours, and then COVID hit and that just got more and more intense. And as much as I knew the work that I was doing was really, really meaningful, I also didn't feel like I was accomplishing the things that I wanted to accomplish in my life. So I was sitting in a place called Mox Boarding House. If you live in Seattle, it's a lovely little board game cafe where you can eat food and play board games. And I was sitting there and I looked around and I looked at my husband and I said, man, I wonder if this place is hiring. I wonder if I could find a job doing this, because this seems super fun. And I didn't take it super seriously at first, but I definitely thought about it, and it sort of sat in the back of my head until I finally decided to look and see what existed in that world. And I did. I found jobs for marketing managers, for content managers, all things that I knew that I had the skills and capability of doing. But how do you even start doing that? I found it fairly easy at first, and part of that is because I was so passionate about tabletop gaming. I do it all the time. It's what I do when I get home from work. It's what I do on my weekends. And so being able to translate the skills that I had developed in global health to board gaming was actually fairly easy because I could talk that language and be excited about it. And one of the things that I really wanted to talk about with this group is one of my main reasons for, not the only, but one of my main reasons for leaving global health and transitioning to tabletop gaming was this idea that I wanted less purpose and more joy in my life. As the panelists said before me, far more eloquently than I ever could, there is so much purpose and being driven by a real desire to make a difference in the world and really make a change in a positive way. And that is incredibly admirable. And I am in awe of the work that many of you do every day. In that, I had lost my own personal sense of joy, and I had neglected my own happiness to the point where it just wasn't tenable anymore. And so as I was looking for careers outside of the global health sphere, I knew that I needed to find something that had less purpose and more joy. And that is definitely what I got with Wizards of the Coast. In terms of how you apply this to your own life, one of the wonderful things that Heidi said is, what is your deeper why? What actually motivates you? And so as you're thinking about your career transition, think about what you want out of your job. Think about what gets you up in the morning. What are the things that you would do even if they didn't pay you any money at all? And look and see if there are jobs there that you could potentially apply for that you could be great candidates for. It's definitely not an easy thing, and it's not always a perfect thing, but it is a great place to start. So I started my job at Wizards and it was fabulous. I got to play board games all day. The people there were incredible. They do really, really wonderful work supporting local artists. It was fabulous. But then I started getting into it, and that day-to-day grind really started to get to me. And every day I would say, oh, I have to do this again tomorrow. I have to do this again tomorrow. I have to do this again tomorrow. And it got to the point where that joy that I was seeking had just disappeared. And I knew that, again, I needed to think about a change. And part of it was really understanding that as much as your passion and your purpose can drive you and your profession forward, you also have to be realistic and look at the day-to-day of your life. I knew that I didn't love looking at spreadsheets all day. I wanted to write, I wanted to do strategy, I wanted to engage with communities and work with a team in person. And that was all things that I wasn't necessarily getting when I was working at Wizards of the Coast. And so when I made the decision to take a break from that and move on to something different, I knew that that is what I needed to look for. I needed to look for a job with strategy, with more writing, with teams on the ground. And that was kind of terrifying because when I left Wizards, I left without a job lined up because I knew that I had to in order to keep myself sane. I then did what I think many of you have considered doing, which is tried my hand at consulting. Not always necessarily the best option, but it definitely is helpful. And I returned to my roots in global health. So I did some consulting with PATH. I did some consulting with an organization called Mathematica, with an organization called Health AI. And it was really wonderful to be able to call on my network that I already had to find things to help me fill that gap. But particularly in the scenario that we're in today, that is not always possible because there are so many people who are looking at those consulting opportunities or looking to fill a gap between different full-time jobs. So it's something to think about, but here I really want you to start thinking about what do you actually want your day to look like? What skills are you good at? What skills do you like doing? What is the type of work that keeps you engaged, keeps you moving, keeps you going? And then make sure that the jobs that you are looking for fit those characteristics. Again, way easier said than done, but it's a really important piece of this if you want to have your career be sustainable long-term. And then this is one of my favorite quotes: creativity requires a wild mind and a disciplined eye. And I think this is exactly the approach that I took when I started looking for my next full-time opportunity after leaving Wizards of the Coast. And it was really this sense that I knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to write. I knew I wanted to work on strategy. I knew I wanted to work here in Seattle. And I let my mind go wild with that from there. I looked at all sorts of different organizations just to see what opportunities existed, and then pursued the ones that I thought maybe I could even be a little bit qualified for, even if I had no idea what the organization really was working on or anything technical about the organization. I knew I could learn all of those things. And I knew that the skill sets I had were valuable skill sets as long as I framed them in a way that made sense to the organization I was applying for. I'm sitting today in an airplane factory. I couldn't have told you a single thing about airplanes a year and a half ago, but now I can tell you way more about airplanes than anyone cares to know. I also encourage you, as you're thinking about other potential opportunities, to look outside of those traditional roles that we think of when we're leaving global health. Certainly pharmaceutical companies, CSRs, or corporate social responsibilities, corporate philanthropy are all things that immediately come to mind. But when you are thinking about places to look, think wildly outside of the box. There are a ton of roles, even within Boeing, where I'm working now, that I would never have imagined would exist unless I went and looked for them. So it definitely takes some creativity, but as you're doing this, a few things to really keep in mind. What are those skills that you want to be doing every day? And what are your values? What are your no-go organizations that you will never work for because you are morally opposed to them? Don't bother. But there are plenty of organizations that still meet your criteria that are eager and excited to have skills that you have. Also acknowledging here, the job market is really tough right now, and it is hard to stand out. But in many ways, when you are applying to private sector companies, your experience in global health can be one of your differentiators. When I was applying here at Boeing, I talked to the hiring team a little bit afterwards, and they said the fact that I had been a Peace Corps volunteer, the fact that I had global experience, the fact that I was used to working with cross-functional teams were all incredibly positive and actually put me over the edge in terms of getting the role. So it is valuable. There are a lot of things that are transferable in that way if you can get your foot in the door, which just takes, you know, some tinkering on your resume and a ton of luck, which I will very much admit to. And then going back to one of the comments that was in the chat, like, yes, it is your responsibility as a job seeker to translate your experience to a company. And one of the most important parts of doing that is understanding the language that that company is using, really focusing in on how are they using work? How do they talk about the things that they're doing? What is the language in the job description that gives you a clue about what is actually important for that job? And it's important to make an impression. And of course, you know, this is tried and true career advice, but make sure that you do spend time researching, and that includes informational interviews. It includes reading about them and reading their website. And I also would say, go on Reddit, read about the company on Reddit if they have one, read about it on LinkedIn and Glassdoor. Reach out to folks who work there that even aren't the hiring managers, just to actually fully get a sense of the world that you're trying to apply to. And find out if they have events. Just like this event with the Women in Global Health, there are other organizations that support women in manufacturing, women in industry, and just general events as well, where you can start absorbing some of the ways that they talk about the work that they're doing, so that you can then infuse that into not only your resume, but also your cover letter. Resumes are super important, as you all probably know. AI is taking over the world slowly. And so it is important that you have keywords in your resume, but don't make your resume sound like it's written by a robot. It's something that I've heard time and time again from the HR team here at Boeing, that people who have clearly used ChatGPT to stuff their resume full of keywords often don't get through, because even if they make through the AI screening, as soon as a human looks at it, they're like, ah, this is AI. So it's about finding that balance of making sure you're using words that mean something to that organization, and also making sure that your own self comes through in your resume. I can't stress enough the importance of a compelling cover letter. It is critical that you use your cover letter not to replicate the information that is in your resume, but make your case. Why you? Why this company? Why this position? What is your passion? And how does your career in global health translate over to the work that that company does? I wrote a different cover letter for every single application that I did, Wizards of the Coast, Boeing, and the hundreds of other jobs that I applied for in that time, because I knew that that is something that makes a difference, and that it is something that will matter to the hiring team once they get past the AI screen of your resume. And make sure you're ready for the interview. I spent a ton of time reading up on Glassdoor and Reddit and other places about the interview process here at Boeing, so that I could feel fully confident when I walked through that door. All right, my second to last point is that you will continue learning. You will always learn, and I am learning to this day. There are a very large number of similarities between the work of global health and the work of aerospace. One of the things that we talk about a lot here at Boeing is being cognizant and respecting the consequences of our work. Because if we do something wrong here in the 737 factory, it could mean hundreds of lives. And the same is true in global health. The stakes are incredibly high, and there is a lot of really important attention being paid to the work that you're doing. And that's true for companies all over the place. And so finding those similarities and being able to lean back on the skills that you are confident in your global health career will help you advance in your career in the private sector. And you can still have a global impact. The number of cool things that I get to work on, even if I'm not directly responsible here in Boeing, is it keeps me inspired. So we had a project recently where we supported young women who wanted to become pilots in Morocco. And that is not something that I ever thought that I would be doing here at Boeing, but there are things that you can do at private sector companies that still allow you to have a global impact and to do positive things in the world. I would also say, even if after my little spiel and trying to tell you all to come and work for the private sector, you still think that global health is your future, that doesn't mean you can't take a pit stop in the private sector. There is a ton that you can learn that is transferable back to the global health world, and you will only be better for it. One of the things that I love, Village Reach was actually founded by someone from the private sector who was learning about infrastructure and how to build infrastructure in a new way, and brought that knowledge and that perspective to global health. And that is why we have great organizations like Village Reach today. So there is a future for you in global health if you want one, but you might have to take a time out and come help build airplanes. The very last point that I wanted to make is that it's okay to stay hopeful. Hope can be incredibly painful, and it can be really hard to watch your bank balance go down and to feel your own ego being damaged because you can't get an interview or can't get a job. But there is a home for you somewhere. You just have to find it. And as much as that is hard and it can take a huge toll on you, staying hopeful is one of the best things that you can do in order to get to the point where you are actually accepting an offer and walking through that door. I think that is all I will have to say. And like I said, there will be far more practical exercises next weekend where we can dive more into this in a practical way for each one of you. But wanted to just say thank you and say that spending my afternoon with you has been like riding on a velociraptor through the wilds. And really appreciate your time, and I'll hand it back over to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Anna. That was really a very emotionally felt presentation. It spoke to me directly as someone who is in the same boat as many of you and actively job hunting. So I really both loved your visuals and your messages. So thank you. Well received. I'm really honored to help as part of the coordinating team for this entire workshop series. And my name is Claire Zalay-Timbo, and I'm a consultant, but I'm also a job hunter in the global health space. So like many of you, I have had one of the most topsy-turvy years of my life and my career, and it has been really disorienting. And so part of what I wanted to share with you all now is that our intention with the second half of the series, which will be 2 live in-person sessions, is to address some of those mental health elements for those of you who have been job hunting perhaps for months at this point. So starting on our next session, which is November 1st, and then our following session, November 8th, we are actually going to be creating accountability groups in triads and or up to 5 people, depending on registration numbers. And that will allow you to connect with folks who are in similar scenarios as yourself, who are job hunting, who maybe have similar career experiences or passions. And that way you don't have to feel alone when you're doing it all, because like many of our presenters said earlier, this can be extremely taxing. And so what we'll do is when you register online through the link that will be provided in the chat, you will be giving us some information so we can best sort you into these groups. And then in the in-person sessions on the following 2 Saturdays, you'll be working with your groups closely and getting to know each other. So if you have any questions about this or you have any thoughts on the process, please feel free to reach out to us directly. But this is our intention with the next 2 elements of this workshop series, and we're looking forward to hopefully having it be a really powerful resource for all of you, and myself included, because I'll be in there too. And now I'm really excited to just share a little bit more about the next 2 sessions. You can register too if you want right now, if you haven't already, but they are coming up the next 2 consecutive Saturdays, so November 1st and November 8th. They will be at the University of Washington. And I just want to highlight that they're at slightly different times. So the November 1st is an afternoon session because we'll have a little happy hour networking session in the evening afterwards. And then part 3 will be in the morning. Oh, and sorry, one thing to note is that for session 2, so the November 1st, we'd like to make sure, and we'll send emails for everyone who register, that you bring a hard copy of your CV and cover letter, because we're actually going to be doing some peer review and support directly on your CV after we have a panel with HR experts. So there's also other ways to stay connected with Women in Global Health. You can join our Seattle group if you'd like. You can also stay involved and keep an eye on what we're doing through our LinkedIn. So feel free to reach out to us if you have anything you want to learn more about or just stay connected. One thing I'll make a plug for, because I'm part of a number of the groups that Women in Global Health Seattle has revamped this year, is that many of our panelists spoke to the need of finding community. And I think there's a really powerful way to do that if you join some of the groups that the Women in Global Health Seattle chapter has cultivated, whether it's based on your own identities or perhaps your job hunting, or you just want to meet up and talk about books that you love. There's probably a group out there meeting already, so please do consider joining us. And then last but not least, I really just want to thank all of the panelists who dedicated your time and energy, Annette, our incredible moderator, Anna, for your fantastic presentation, and a big shout out to Pallavi and Linda, who made today's session possible. And all of you who showed up and took time out of your day to learn, listen, think through these next steps and what we all have to do to contribute to this space. So I just really want to thank everyone, and we'll be excited to see you in person for those of you who can come to the next 2 events as well.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.